Okay, I'm about to invite our next speaker to join us. Our speaker wasn't going to be a speaker until about, I think it was 8 o'clock this morning or even earlier. And I had a proper conversation with Dr. Andy Schmulow. And I was absolutely blown away by the relevance and frankly the timeliness of the conversation with Dr. Schmulow, because what he was saying to me chimed so much with the thinking that's being developed within the Transparency Task Force. Now, I'm going to read to you, I hope Andy doesn't mind me doing this, I don't think he will. I'm going to read to you the opening note I sent Andy, I should say Dr. Schmulow, sorry, after we had the conversation today, just to give you a feel for the level of appreciation that Dr. Schmulow is speaking with us today. Here's the email that I sent just after we spoke. I'm reading it out verbatim. Dear Andy, thank you so much for your time just now. It was a spookily timely conversation. They say the universe conspires to help people with clearly defined goals and good intent. I mention that because I have had hundreds of great conversations with people this year, and I think the conversation we just had is right up there as one of the most significant of all of them. It's as if I'm trying to get somewhere in the dark and I've just found a helpful kindred spirit with a powerful torch who can help to guide the way. Your insight and experience is hyper relevant to what we want to do, and I'll always remember your willingness to get up at 4:30 your time to help us. And the reason why Dr. Andy Schmulow is getting up, or got up at about 4:30 a.m. his time, is because he's on the other side of the world. And those of you who know, Australia has gone through a very, very interesting time recently. And we are absolutely convinced that there is huge learning opportunity in looking at what's been happening in relation to Australia. And I'd like to now invite Dr. Schmulow to share his thoughts as a very, very special and a very, very welcome guest. And please, folks, when it comes to showing our appreciation to Dr. Schmulow, go crazy. It took a lot to get up at 4:30 a.m. his time to do that. So, Dr. Schmulow, over to you, please. Share your thoughts for the next 10 minutes or so, and then we'll open up for a bit of Q&A after that. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Andy, and please feel free to call me Andy, or if it's easier, just hey you. This is a very large group of people, and many of whom are of great eminence. And so it's a privilege to be asked to speak to you, and I appreciate it, and I thank you most respectfully for your time. So my speciality, my research specialization is in driving good conduct in Twin Peaks regulatory regimes. And for those of you who are familiar with the Twin Peaks model, you will know that it is in operation in the United Kingdom and Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa, and Belgium. It's a regulatory model that was devised by an Englishman by the name of Michael Taylor, and he intended it for deployment in the United Kingdom, but it was in fact Australia that implemented it first about in 1998 thereabouts, and it was after the global financial crisis that it was implemented in the United Kingdom. So we have the longest and most extensive experience with the Twin Peaks model, and our experience has been a painful one. We had a Royal Commission of Inquiry into misconduct in the financial industry, which handed down its report at the beginning of 2019. And there was about 10 years of misconduct that was constantly in the media, which gave rise to the Royal Commission. I was one of, if not the first academic in Australia to support the call for a Royal Commission, and I supported that call longer and more consistently than anybody else. And the misconduct that gave rise to the Royal Commission, well, it was shocking enough to give rise to a Royal Commission. But what came out at the Royal Commission was a bacchanalian feast of venality, of wickedness, of an absolute arrogated contempt for the law and active collusion by the regulators. So that then leads me to the next point I want to make, and that is that I had said, and others of my colleagues had said before the Royal Commission, that our regulators are captured. And that was, in exactly those words, one of the findings of our Royal Commission, that our regulators are captured, deeply captured, suborned to the industry. And as you have in the United Kingdom, we in Australia, we have a Twin Peaks model where our version of the FCA, called ASIC, is responsible for conduct, and our prudential regulator is responsible for system stability. Evidence came up at the Royal Commission of not just a systematic program of turning a blind eye, but at times active collusion. And if you delve into the scholarship, the scientific literature, the research into regulatory capture, you will see that there is evidence that regulators of any and every industry are susceptible to capture. Whether it's telecommunications or healthcare or oil and gas, they are all susceptible to capture, but none of them is as susceptible as the regulators of the financial industry. And the evidence shows overwhelmingly that the regulators of the financial industry are not only captured, they fall first and they fall furthest. This is not a criticism of financial system regulators per se. There are forces at work that are so subtle and so insidious that they're very difficult to identify, let alone combat. Let me give you an example. At the one end of the spectrum, you have capture that is caused by corruption. Somebody gets a brown paper bag full of money. But at the other end of the spectrum are regulators who go and are individuals who go and work for the regulator and have a particular ideological bent. And that ideological bent results in them believing that whatever is good for the banking industry is good for the country. Now, often what is good for the banking industry is good for the country, but not always. So, for example, in Australia, our Productivity Commission has said that our banking industry has become a cosy four-bank oligopoly, immune to competition, and that this is the reason why our banking industry is now the most or the second most profitable, depending on the time period you use, the most or the second most profitable banking industry in the world by ROE. It is an anomaly for an advanced, developed economy like Australia to have a banking industry that is regularly returning 13 and 14 and 15% return on equity. And our Productivity Commission has said it is those exorbitant returns that are the reason why there have been no real wage increases in Australia in the last 15 years. Our banking industry has become parasitic. And regulators who regulate that industry, who look at the banking industry and have this ideological notion that what's good for the banking industry is good for the country, will not seize the nettle because they don't see the problem. So I was called upon to provide some of my research to the Australian Royal Commission, which I did. And I'm pleased to say that the recommendation in my research was adopted as a formal recommendation of the Royal Commission. And that recommendation was contained in recommendation 6.14 of the Royal Commission final report, which was to establish a board of oversight over our regulators, or what I rather glibly call a regulator to regulate the regulator. Now, this suggestion is not entirely mine. My research is based on the writings of scholars dating back to the 1860s. I think in particular of Charles Francis Adams Jr., who, observing the manner in which the railroad commissions in the United States had been captured by the railroad barons, spoke of the need to establish a sunshine commission. And this is something that ties into the TTF's underlying philosophy. It is based upon a quote. It is based upon something said by the former United States Chief Justice, William Brandeis. He said, "There is no disinfectant more powerful than sunshine. There is no policeman more effective than the electric light." And what we saw at the Royal Commission in Australia was that the public opprobrium, the public naming and shaming, the publication, the dissemination into the public realm of the evidence about what the regulators had been up to created a stronger driver for those regulators to change what they had been doing than anything else in the preceding 20 years. Sunshine is the best disinfectant. When evidence of this collusion is put into the public domain, regulators have no choice. They have to step up and they have to start enforcing the law. I'm pleased to say that the suggestion for the establishment of a, as I put it, a regulator to regulate the regulator has now been ventilated by our federal government, and we currently have legislation before our federal parliament, the Financial Regulator Assessment Authority Bill, which will, for the first time since these suggestions were first made in the 1860s, establish a Sunshine Commission. No doubt there are many of you who are listening to this who are saying, yes, but what happens if the regulator who regulates the regulator becomes captured? And I don't have the opportunity at this point to go into all the details, but I can assure you we've thought about that long and hard. We've thought about how it is that you go about building an insulation around this board of oversight to insulate it from capture, so that it will provide its reviews of the regulator at arm's length, that they will be independent, that they will be critical when necessary, and most importantly, as soon as they are made available, they are put into the public domain. We've put a great deal of thought, and I've teamed up in my research with an industrial psychologist to ensure that there are mechanisms in place to make sure that membership of the Board of Oversight is comprised of people who are not beholden to the industry, who are not former members of the industry, who are not beholden to the regulator, who are not former members of the regulator, who have a sufficiently high profile in the public domain and who are sufficiently secure in their own income, to put it bluntly, that they are able to engage in this kind of work in a manner that will put the public benefit first. And the last thing I want to say to you, I'm sure I've run out of time, Andy, I'm sorry if I've been rabbiting on for too long. The last thing I want to say to you, ladies and gentlemen, is this. In the work that I've been involved in this respect in Australia, in New Zealand, in South Africa. South Africa has recently adopted a Twin Peaks model, and I helped the South African government draft their legislation. In those countries that I've mentioned and in others, in Canada, people around the world look to the United Kingdom for leadership. If you look at the Companies Acts in Australia and South Africa and New Zealand and Canada, you will see that they are based on your Companies Act. I'm assisting the South African government in the implementation of a treating customers fairly regime in South Africa. That's based on your TCF regime. When it comes to the manner in which your regulators conduct themselves and the manner in which the manner and the type of legislation that you enact, many countries around the world follow your leadership. It is for that reason alone that it is so important that if your regulatory regime is not working, you need to fix it, and you need to fix it now. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you. Well, thank you. I can see Baron Seeker putting his hands together to show his appreciation. I'd like us all, please, to take time to do that. That was wonderful. It really was wonderful. Bear in mind, folks, it's Andy hasn't even had a chance to have his breakfast yet. That was really, really, really spot on.